So in today's For Alumni by Alumni session, transitioning into your next career, excuse me, we are happy to have Beth Bierbower, a 1992 alum from our Master of Public Management program with us, who will be discussing her path from C-suite of a Fortune 100 company to a new career based on her passion and experience as a senior healthcare executive. Beth has more than 30 years of proven executive level experience in the health insurance industry. As segment president and member of Humana's executive management team, Beth led the group Commercial, Military, and Specialty Benefits. She was also Chief Operating Officer of Humana's Specialty Benefits Division and was Enterprise Vice President leading Humana's product development and innovation teams. In addition, she held leadership roles with Highmark Blue Cross and Blue Shield as President, Healthcare Strategy, and Chief Operating Officer for Coventry Health Plans. She's a published author and is currently working on a new book concerning our topic today. Beth is a frequent speaker on customer service and leadership topics and is host of the Be Time podcast, where she interviews leaders and innovators in and outside of the healthcare industry. After this session, you'll all be receiving an email, and we'll make sure that you have access to her Be Time podcast. We will have time for questions at the end of the session, but my colleague Georgette Hatfield is happy to entertain questions throughout the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Beth.
Thanks, Ron. And thanks everybody for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today on what's next. And we are going to talk about successful career transitions. And we're going to talk about transitions, whether you're looking for another job within your industry, you're thinking about retirement and what the next thing is. Maybe you're just wanting to get on some board seats, or maybe you're really looking to make a bigger move. Maybe you want to go to a different industry, or maybe relocate to a different geography, but in the same industry. So the idea is that we will talk about many different transitions, and it does take a bit of planning and it does take a bit of work, but with that planning and with that work comes some success, I can assure you. So Georgette, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thomas Edison said that success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. And you will hear work throughout this presentation, but it really is doable. But if you can put this in the framework in your mind that you would treat this like any other major initiative that you would be working on at your place of work, then that's 90% of really what you need to do to be successful. So Georgette, if we can go to the next slide, please. There are many different types of transitions, as I mentioned, and I tried to create a little schematic here that would show sort of how much time it might take for you to really be able to effectively make that transition and what the difficulty might be. I think it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics typically says for every $10,000 you make, it usually takes a month to find another job. They use that as a benchmark. So if you were making $120,000 a year, it would probably take you about a year to find a job. What I would tell you is that's probably reasonable, but the more money you make, the more challenging it is, because you have more people competing for a narrower opening of jobs. And that applies whether you're looking for jobs at the C-suite or a senior level in an organization. If you're looking for a board seat, the jobs are narrow there, particularly with public companies, even with some private companies. So the higher you go, the more difficult it is to find, and the little longer it takes, which is why having a plan in place is really, really critical. And go ahead to the next slide. What I want to do today is really sort of walk you through the steps, tell you a little bit about my journey, and then make sure that we open up so that you can ask any questions that you would like to. This is a really very basic slide, but it is really basic blocking and tackling that you have to do in order to really have a successful transition. And the reason I came up with this, and as Ron mentioned, I'm in the process of writing a book about this, is because about 5 years ago, when I was thinking about transitioning out of corporate America, and I knew I wanted to stay extremely active, didn't want to have that traditional retirement, I started searching for articles and books and things like that that could help me. And they were few and far between. I really couldn't find anything. Most of the things that I saw were retirement. They were all about financial services. Well, I really didn't need that. What I needed was some guidance on how I really transition. So since I really wasn't finding what it was I needed, I said, okay, well, I'm an executive. Certainly I've developed some skills along the way. how do I step back and think about how I navigated my career? And might I use those same skills and that same thought process to think about my transition? And I knew I wanted to transition out of corporate America, but I wanted to stay very much in the thick of things in healthcare and very, very active. So I created these steps that I've been using over the past several years, and I've also documented my journey, and hopefully that will all come to fruition in a book. But this is what's been very effective for me in making a very uncertain transition. So Georgette, if you'll go to the next slide. I want to talk about two parts of my journey. The first part is as I thought about transitions was the very first part of my journey where I knew that I wanted to climb the corporate ladder. And in doing so, I knew that each step would be a transition. So I needed to really think about the lens at which I was thinking through each transition. And when I was still in my 20s, I was living in Pittsburgh and very fortunately had a wonderful man who was a mentor and a sponsor of me. And one of the things he said is, you need to go to graduate school. You need to get a graduate degree. And probably with some luck on my part, I decided upon Carnegie Mellon University. With a lot of luck, they accepted me into their program. And that was really very beneficial to me, not just because of all the technical things that I learned there around leadership and strategy and business and things like that, but also because there was a lot of additional learning that I had here. And one particular story that I want to share is we were sort of wrapping up and getting ready to graduate, if you will. We had sort of an open discussion with several of the professors, and people were saying, I'm going to go back to my organization. I'm going to tell them, now that I have this degree from Carnegie Mellon, I want a promotion or I want more money. And at that point, listening to that conversation, I said, you know what? I'm going to be the only person that can actually control my career, because I don't think if I go back to my office and just demand more money or promotion, I'm going to get it. I think I'm going to have to be very calculating. And that discussion at Carnegie Mellon really planted the seed for me that I would have to really take control of my career. So I took a little bit of time then and said, where do I really want to be 5 to 10 years from now? And I decided that while I didn't have it quite down, I said, I want a seat at the table. And I want to be an executive in a large healthcare organization. And at that point, I was working for what is known as Health America in Pennsylvania, there in the Pittsburgh area, which is now part of Aetna. And I said, okay, well, to me, to get a seat at the table at a large healthcare organization, I need to look for companies with scale. So it was through that lens of scale that I would then make the decisions for my transition. And so my next transition then, as I said, I needed to go to a company that had more membership. We had about 500,000 lives at that point in Health America. So I made the transition to Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, which had several million lives. And then I was there for 5 years or so. And then I had the opportunity to go to Humana. And I said, okay, what lens am I looking through? Well, I'm not just going to a smaller competitor of the same size or type. This is a larger competitor that has national scale. So it would give me not only the broad geography that I was looking for to be able to manage effectively, but also much larger in terms of members, number one, and much more diverse in the types of members that it covered: Medicaid, Medicare, commercial, folks who work for employers like many of you and I do, individuals, and it even had a military program. Then once I got to Humana, I said, okay, here I am in an organization. I looked through this lens of scale to make my transition, but I'm not at the senior table. I'm a level down. My leader at the time reported to the CEO. So then I said, okay, how do I get to that next level? I'm going to have to rotate myself through the organization. So I just sort of summarized that first part of my journey through the climbing the corporate ladder, saying I had to identify my lens and be very thoughtful about the moves that I was making so that it would ultimately get me to where I wanted to be. Because if I would have stayed in Western Pennsylvania and just tried to move from small health plan to small health plan, or from a bigger health plan but been out in the field, I would have not had the opportunity to manage at scale and be able to have that seat at the executive table. So let's go to part 2 of the journey. And part 2 of the journey basically started in 2015. Back then, Humana was under a takeover offer from a competitor, Aetna. And I thought, oh, this is just absolutely perfect for me. I was running the commercial and military division at the time, and the commercial division was something that Aetna was really well known for. I said, this is just going to be perfect because this is what they do really well. My division $8 billion in revenue, but relatively small compared to what Aetna did. They'll just want to absorb my division, and they'll either offer me another job or I'll get a package. But this is perfect because I'll take the package and this will allow me to move on to my next phase. So that's when, and that was the impetus that I needed to really start thinking about, what does my next act really look like? And I sat down and I started thinking about it, and I thought, I don't really have a mission. I'm not really sure what it is that I want to do. What is it that gives me energy? I really hadn't thought thoroughly about that. Even though I had a seat at the executive table, I said, what skills and capabilities do I really have? Because I think we all know the higher you go, the more most people think you have fewer skills and capabilities. It's really the people in the middle that are running the organization, right? I didn't have a roadmap. And then I wasn't sure about the timing because this acquisition was hanging over my head, if you will. Well, ultimately, the acquisition did not go through, and Humana remained an independent company. And I remained at the company for several more years, but it provided me an opportunity to move from my role in leading one of the large divisions at Humana to actually doing a startup with inside the company, which actually fit into my plan. But the point was, I actually had to plan for this second part of the journey. And that pending acquisition was really the kick in the pants that I needed to start to think about it. So Georgette, if you would go to the next one, please. So when we look at these different components, the first thing is you really have to think about, what is your mission? What is it that gives you passion? What is it that gives you energy? When you are focused on what it is you love to do, you have energy, you bring energy to the table, and you really energize the people around you as well. So you really have to step back and think about what you want to do. And for me, I had two things that I wanted to continue to do in my next career. I really enjoyed helping people grow and develop professionally. I spent a lot of time doing that at Humana. I was a mentor, I was a sponsor. If somebody said, I really want to talk about my career, I would have a cup of coffee with them and help them think through that. So that was really important. And then the second thing that is really important to me was to learn something new every day. I got out of bed to go to work at Humana every day, and literally meant going on a plane almost every day, because I felt like I learned something every day at Humana. And for me, whatever I did in my next act had to bring that learning to the table. I wanted to learn as much from the people I was interacting with in my next phase as they did from me. So, and remember, I have Grandma Moses up here. You are never too old to learn something or do something different. She was 76 years old when she started painting for the first time. And when you think about your mission, somebody shared with me, and I thought this was really important, make sure you understand what you don't want to do. Sometimes we say, well, we'd like to be a board member or whatever. Well, okay, great. If you're going down that path, make sure you know what it is you're passionate about, because the worst thing you can do is serve as a consultant or a board member for an organization that you don't believe in, that doesn't get you excited, and then you find yourself basically sitting there doing a job and not doing anything you're really passionate about. For me, one of the things that I knew I did not want to do in my next phase is I didn't want to get caught up in big corporate America again. So I put really tight parameters around that. If I have a large corporation that contacts me and says, we'd like you to come do business with us, we want to go deeper in healthcare, or we have a special project, I make sure I put really tight parameters around that the project is maybe no more than 15 hours a week or no longer than a month or two in duration, because I just don't want to get caught up in that big bureaucracy again, because that's not what I am passionate about. And then the last thing I would say is, you can do anything you want to do, and you absolutely should dream big. Just understand that if you want to become a neurosurgeon and you have no clinical experience today, it's just going to be a big time commitment and money commitment. So you can do whatever you want to do. Just understand what you're in for in terms of time and resource commitment before you go after it, so that you are, in fact, grounding your dreams in some type of reality. So Georgette, would you go to the next slide, please? The next thing is what seems very straightforward, is skills and capability. But I have to tell you, this can be a double-edged sword, because what you have to think about is not just what skills and capabilities you have, but what do you think you're probably better at than most people? Because you're going to find that a lot of people, if you want to transition to a new role or to a new company, there are a lot of people with similar skills out there. What is it that you bring to the table that's different? So for me, I knew I wanted to go into the new gig economy. I know I wanted to serve as a strategic advisor. And I said, okay, I'm actually good at what I refer to as collecting and connecting people. And when I mean that, what that means is just for years, I have returned phone calls of all the recruiters, even though I wasn't looking for a job. I would introduce people to other people and say, hey, Sally, I think you might want to meet Jim over here because he's working on a similar project for another small company. You two might benefit by learning each other. And so that collecting and connecting helped me build a network, not by networking, but by simply helping others. And I learned over time that that was a skill that I had. The other thing that I also did was I wanted to learn what my brand was, because your brand goes with you as you transition into a new role or a new career. And so I started talking to some of my colleagues. I had a GH Smart assessment done as well. And luckily people said, oh yeah, like Beth knows everybody. She knows a lot of people and she'll help you get connected to the right people. So I knew from that feedback from my colleagues that what I really wanted to do and the skill that I thought I had, in fact, they thought that I had as well. The second skill that I really thought that I had was I'd worked over 30 years with health plans. So I understood health plans, I understood how they worked, and I could help. So how could I take that skill and who could I help? Well, I could help startups. I could help companies by being on their board or serving as a consultant because I understand how health plans think. I understand how they're organized. I understand what it means to have a small company come and pitch you for your services and pitfalls that they may encounter. So I really had to take a look at what skills and capabilities I had and how that would transfer. And so I said, okay, I connect people and I have health plan skills. I think I can translate this to serve as a strategic advisor to startups and other companies, and also possibly then serve on the boards of companies that really want to go deep into healthcare. And that's how I was able to really translate that. So if you go to the next slide, the next slide is really where we talk about the roadmap. I'm a lifetime Weight Watchers member, and we have a saying that I think we paraphrase from Ben Franklin, which is basically failure to plan is a plan to fail. You have to have a plan around your transition. This is not something that you can do willy-nilly. I mentioned 2015. That's when I started. I retired at the end of 2019. So it was a 4-year process of really amping up the networking that I had already been doing, but really looking through that lens of what I wanted to do next and say, now that I know what I want to do next, serve as a strategic advisor, serve startups in particular, serve on boards, what do I have to lay out? What activities is it that I have to do? So I had to really lay out a roadmap. And this is what I meant by when I said earlier, I looked at this as a project. Look at this as a side hustle. And again, whether you're looking to move to a new organization, a new industry, you just want a promotion within your current organization, think of it as a project, lay out a roadmap that says, okay, here's my mission. Here are the skills that I have. Now, what is it do I need to do? Who do I need to connect with in my ecosystem? What connections do I need to make? What additional skills maybe do I need to learn? What committees do I need to get on with inside my organization? What external organizations possibly do I need to join to be able to be really well networked? And one of the decisions I make is serendipitous. A friend of mine called me and she said, I'm going to become the CEO of the American Telemedicine Association. And again, back to this theme that I really enjoy helping people. She said, I'd like you to be on our board. And I said, oh, that'd be great. And she goes, why do you want to be on our board? And I said, I think telemedicine really has a future. I know there hasn't been much uptick in that, but I really think it has a future. I think it's like Airbnb. There's a lot of unlocked potential. Well, lo and behold, as you can imagine, in 2020, being on the board of the American Telemedicine Association was a very busy time because telemedicine just exploded. But I was open to that idea. I had a real reason for wanting to be on that board and really wanting to help. But it was something that I had on my roadmap saying, how do I make sure that I get engaged in entities that would have broader reach? And that was just one example. And in talking about broader reach, let's go to the next slide, because this is one of my favorite slides, because this is actually how I feel about networking. And I'm assuming that some of you may feel the same way. I dislike the concept of networking as most of us think about it. The last thing I want to do after working a 10-hour day is get in my car and go to a reception and have some drinks with people and stick out my hand and trade business cards, or at a conference event. But networking is important. But I just recently heard somebody say something that really resonated with me. It isn't just the networking, it is the network. It is how broad and deep your network is that will really help you, and it will really help you in spades. So I would share this. I am not the type of person that just likes to go to events and stick out their hand, as I said, but I am the type of person that likes to help others. I return phone calls for recruiters. With few exceptions, I return phone calls even of salespeople. As long as it was in an area that I thought that I was responsible for, or something I might be interested in, I would return the phone call. I would sit through meetings where people pitched their presentation, and I would make sure that I got to know who they were, because I'm a curious person. I really wanted to learn. So over the years, these types of things have really paid off. Sometimes they have paid off 10 and 15 years later, which sounds like a really long time, folks, but they do in fact pay off. I literally got one of my board seats because when I was working for the public company, Humana, we had investors, and we had the investment firms, and once a year they would come to our presentations, they would listen to earnings calls. And through those presentations, you got to know some of them just at a high level. And one of them moved on, and two companies removed called me and said, I think you could really add value to this board, and I would like you to consider. I told them that they should consider interviewing you. And this is a person that I first met 20 years ago and had occasional interactions with over that 20-year period, maybe once every 3 years or so. So you never know where those connections are going to come from. But the idea is, if you're useful to somebody, if you connect people, if you return phone calls. I know when I started telling recruiters when I was still working in corporate America, and I said, I didn't sit there and tell recruiters, hey, I'm going to retire. I said, I think I'd like to start to look at some board seats. And one of the recruiters said to me, this is great, Beth. You've always returned our phone calls. So we've gotten to know you over the last 25 years. We know what you've done. This will make it a little bit easier. And it did make it a little bit easier, and it was really helpful. So when you think about networking, don't just think about the traditional thought that we all go, oh, it's not really what I want to do. It's about how you help people, because that will come back in spades, which leads us to the next slide, which is all about execution. So if you are thinking about a job transition, a relocation, whatever it is you're thinking about, put that lens on, and then every interaction you have going forward, you look at that lens. And let me give you an example. When I knew that I wanted to retire from corporate America and do something different, I said, okay, I have that lens on, which means I have to actually deepen my network, and I'm going to have to build a business that for myself. So let's say I had a meeting for business for my corporate job in New York, and it was at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. What I would do is catch a flight and get there at noon or 2 p.m. on Tuesday, handle my regular work stuff, and then I would allow myself, I'd be able to squeeze in 1 or 2 coffees, a drink the night before, and a dinner that would help me network to where I wanted to go. And then I was able to typically do an early breakfast the next morning, and often coffee before my corporate meeting. And then sometimes I could squeeze in lunch before I had to head to the airport. So when I had that one corporate meeting, I made sure that I took advantage and said, who do I know in New York that I want to reconnect with? Who do I want to meet in New York that maybe one of my colleagues or friends can refer me to meet with? And, how do I get with them? And interestingly enough, people would tell you I'm in a nice way. I can be a little bit of a stalker and just say, this is, hey, I'd like to meet you. Here's my background. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Here's what I'm thinking about. I got a lot of no's, but sometimes I got yeses, and those things really, really paid off. If people think that, you will not waste their time and they might learn something interesting for you, they will typically take the meeting. But the big thing is, once I made the decision that I wanted to transition, I started looking at my daily activities differently. And I did create a list of activities. I'm the type of person that I like to check things off of a list. So for me, it was really helpful to lay out that roadmap, say, these are the types of things I need to do. I need to start to meet startups. So I started attending the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. I need to start meeting venture capital firms and private equity firms because they're the people who put people on boards. So it's like, okay, that's great. Or they're the ones that hire strategic advisors for their companies. So I really laid out a plan. And then the hardest thing is to pull the trigger, which is set those meetings up when you happen to be in that city, or even if it's in your own city, set time up for a call, leveraging LinkedIn. You know, if there's somebody that I knew that I saw had a work anniversary, I would just send a quick note, congratulations on your work anniversary, hope you're doing well. Tried to keep it subtle, but tried to really keep myself top of mind. And then the timing was for me, when we were undergoing that potential acquisition, I wasn't quite sure. So I was just being diligent. But even though I ended up pushing off my retirement time for an extra 2 years, I was able to continue to leverage that networking, and it in fact paid off. So let's go to the next slide, which is a little bit of a wrap up, and then we will open it up to questions. And so I would just emphasize to you, understand your mission. What is it that you're passionate about? I just met with somebody yesterday for a cup of coffee, a young man who said, listen, I'm at the point in my career. He said, it's not that I can retire because I have all this money, but I'm not there. So I need to work, but I am at the point in my career where I really want to work on something that I'm passionate about. And I said, okay, and let's work on a strategy for you. What does this look like? What does it look like to maybe pitch your idea inside your organization versus what does it look like to start to look for a new job? And you know, why did I do this? Because about 4 years ago, this young man did me a very simple favor with a project that I was working on. So it was kind of like, it's time for payback. And so I'm going to be able to help him with what he needs to do. So what's your mission? What gives you energy? Think about the skills and capabilities. You have more skills and capabilities that you can imagine, but what really sets you apart? What would your colleagues say about you that really defines you? Treat it as a project, just like you would at work, or a side hustle. Create the roadmap and then start to pull that trigger. Think about your transition and look through that lens. If you want to relocate to a new country, if you want to go to the UK and you decide you want to live in London, then you better start thinking about what American companies have branches in London, and who do you know on LinkedIn that might be able to connect you there, and who do you know that lives in London, and you know, from your social network, from your personal network, from your professional network. I'll share one last funny story. Don't be afraid to invoke anything. At one point, I was trying to get into an organization to have a conversation with somebody, and I invoked their mother. I knew the person's mother, and I sent a note and said, I just talked to your mother. And your mother told me, and let me tell you, invoking somebody's mother gets you an appointment pretty quickly with somebody that you want to meet with. So think about that lens that you're going through, and then think about all the tools you have at your disposal, and then really leverage them. So I know I've talked really fast, but I think I'd just like to really open it up, and hopefully we have some questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer. Georgette, do we have some questions there?
I do have a question, a few questions. The first question that we got, it says, what are the top 3 most important traits that someone needs to develop in order to successfully transition into a strategic leadership role? And the other side of that question is, and how would you suggest to cultivate those skills?
Sure. So to successfully translate into a strategic role, you have to think strategically. You have to demonstrate that you can think strategically. Oftentimes people get trapped with the label that they can execute. I'll be very open that that happened to me when I worked at Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. In fact, I just had dinner not too long ago with my boss back then, who said, boy, I never thought you would develop into a strategic leader. I was wrong, but he gave me the reason to really think very differently about that because of a conversation we had. So what you have to do is you have to broaden your view. I really encourage people to be intellectually curious, learn everything you can about your industry, learn about business, read business book, leadership books in and outside your business, and then engage in conversations in your organization that are strategic. So as an example, if you're in a meeting and you're with the senior team, or you're with other leaders or colleagues or whatever, engage in that strategic meeting. Just because you're maybe a project manager doesn't mean you don't have thoughts about the strategy. That gives you the opportunity to really be able to demonstrate your strategic thinking skills, number one. And then number two, to actually also demonstrate that, raise your hand to participate on cross-functional committees or projects that are happening in the organization. And even if you don't know what they are, tell your leader that you're interested, and tell other leaders in the organization that you are interested in participating in things like that. Because if you don't tell people you're interested in making a move and making a change or learning something new, they won't know. But if you keep having that conversation with them, then you will become top of mind and you will get the opportunity. Somebody's asking, I see something about a resume in almost 20 years. Do you suggest using a professional firm? I would say not necessarily. Now, I have to share something. My husband is a former chief human resources officer for a large corporation, so I had a little bit easy. But there are so many examples of resumes out there. I would just say, give it to friends, give it to colleagues that you trust, have them take a look at it. Send it to a recruiter. If you talk to a recruiter, say, I would like your feedback on my resume. I don't think you have to send it to a professional. But again, this is where you can network and leverage. Maybe you know somebody in HR, maybe you know a recruiter, and you ask them for a favor to take a look at it. And what is it that they would ask you to change? Tell them to recommend, are there any resumes or LinkedIn profiles of people that they think really demonstrate their skills well? And so I would just ask for that. I would save your money and just rely on people to really give you good feedback, but just get the right people to do that.
All right, we have another question that came earlier, and it says, Liz, I have a dilemma. I'm considering a career switch into a job that is more interesting to me and aligns with my passions, but involves a 35% payout that I won't be able to make up for years. I'm really good at my current job and my higher ups value me, but it's not necessarily close to my mission. What would you recommend?
Well, it depends on how much you want to adjust your lifestyle, and just not only now, but do you feel like you're going to have what you need for when you retire? Because you always have to look at that down the road. And adjusting now for a 35% cut, you have to look at total compensation. So what you may be telling me is, I have to take a 35% salary cut, but I will be getting equity because I'm going to a startup, as an example, that I don't currently get at my current company. Now, a startup or a different company is certainly a risk, but any company is a risk. So I would just weigh the risk, number one, in terms of, is it really just a different type of payout? And I'll take the risk that maybe I will get an equitable payout, but it'll be several years down the road. The second thing is, if you are really not happy, and I mean truly not happy at what you do, then what personal lifestyle changes are you willing to make? Are you willing to live in a smaller home? Are you willing to forgo your daily Starbucks? There are things like that you can easily get rid of that will help you basically maintain your lifestyle, if you will, but cut out some of the small things that would allow you to absorb that. But really determine, is it that you're really unhappy at work and the organization you have? Sometimes here's what I always recommend to people first. Don't necessarily give up on the organization that you're in. Because if people don't know that you're really interested in something, then they're not considering you for it. So for example, you may say, I'm really in healthcare. We're big on now social determinants of health. And if I say I'm really interested in that, but nobody knows that, and they're starting a department over here to focus on that, well, I have to let people know. I have to go talk to those people, the hiring manager there. So don't give up on your current organization, because they may have things that you can do, but if not, then you just have to decide how you can balance from the lifestyle thing. And I just find there are a lot of unnecessary things, quite frankly, you can cut out of your lifestyle, so you can actually take that cut if you want, and still live a comfortable life. What else do we have?
All right, we have another question. Let me just scroll to it. Do you have any tips to efficiently and ethically pursue potential future opportunities while working one's current job?
Yeah, the example that I gave, for example, when I would travel is, required to attend the meeting, right, on Wednesday morning, which I did. But my dinners were free. Never charged dinner off for a networking session for somebody else to the company. Never did that. If I decided to pick up that person's tab, that was on me, and I thought that was well worth it for that cup of coffee or that dinner. But that time was my time. And when you are an exempt employee, your time is your time. You're not on a clock. So I felt comfortable that I could go have a cup of coffee and network with somebody at 3 p.m. because at 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. I may be working on a project for work or working on my email. So I think when you're exempt, you have that flexibility and you could ethically do that. Now, the one thing I would tell you to be very cautious of is when you are networking, you need to be very cautious of competitors and how you network with competitors. You don't want to reveal any information, any confidential information, or look at all in terms of impropriety. So I would tell you, in general, I stayed away from competitors. But if you step back and look at the ecosystem in which your company operates, there are a lot of people and a lot of companies and entities in that ecosystem. So there's still a lot of folks you can network with without worrying about coming across the competition and doing anything that would be inappropriate with the competition. But I would also tell you, when you go to conferences and things like that, you run into competition anyway. So typically when you're in a role, you know who your competitors are in a role because you all run in the same circles, but you just want to make sure that you're acting appropriately and not providing any inappropriate information or confidential information.
Great. Thank you. The next question we have is, you mentioned that the quest for what's next should be grounded in one's current reality. I'm curious if you've ever encountered someone who had a successful transition that was unlikely but still worked out.
Oh, that's a really good, really good question. I have a friend that was started in corporate America and then actually went and started a small business. And then actually her next transformation was really all around caregiving and really championing caregiving. And as part of that process, she got led into media production and made specials and documentaries and commercials and different things like that. So tangentially, it was tied to healthcare, but it was really ended up being a mission about what she experienced with one of her parents as a caregiver. And so she had been in traditional corporate America and then a small business, all tied to this one area. But then she really went for her passion once she encountered some situations with one of her parents and said, wait a minute, there's a problem out here that really you need to address. And so she did a transformation and literally left her business and left everything behind and said, this is the path I'm going to go in, and this is what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on people that are caregivers because I think caregivers need help. And in fact, one of the things she did, which I thought was really interesting, to better understand people and better understand the average American, because she felt she was living in a bubble, she actually went and she wrote about it and became a cashier at one of the large retailers so that she could interact with people on a daily basis and really start to understand what it is that they were encountering. And I just thought that was just really cool that she was able to do that. So yes, she was really successful with that.
All right, our next question says, how do I assess the risk of starting a startup while working? Do I need the financial cushion of 1 to 3 years? And what else would you recommend to prepare before jumping off the corporate sector?
So the first thing I would recommend you do is get the book and listen to the podcast Side Hustle. I think it's Chris Bierbower. If you haven't listened to that, there's a lot of people that talk about their side hustles, and I would definitely start something on the side. Initially when you're working, unless you are independently wealthy, which most of us are not. You want to be very clear and make sure there aren't any conflicts of interest, or that you notify your company of any potential conflicts of interest. What I have found is that most companies, they have a form, you fill it out, and then they will tell you if there are any conflicts of interest. For example, because my husband was an executive at a large employer and I ran the employer group, I just had to let them know that, we may at some point end up doing business with this company. You need to know that I have this conflict. So I would tell you that you need to make sure that you're not, you're not using company equipment and things like that. But I would tell you to start, just start on the side and dedicate your evenings, dedicate your weekends to it, and then see whether or not you think it's gonna take off. You know how much money you can dedicate to it to bootstrap it, before you get to a point where you then decide whether or not you want to go out and talk to venture capitalists. So the biggest thing with that is this: you get to a point where you have to decide whether you're going to burn the boat. So I'm working with a small company right now where the two co-founders are still working for another company. And I said, you're getting close. You're going to have to decide whether you're going to burn the boats and get venture capital money and leave your jobs, because you're at that point where you can't do both. So, and you'll know when you get to that point, but I would always say, start as a side hustle. Just make sure there aren't any conflicts, so you're not doing anything inappropriate and using the company equipment, and make sure your company knows what you're doing. Always better to be transparent.
Great, thank you. We have a follow-up question from an earlier question about kind of the transition while still working for an organization. And she said, the question is, how to share the interest, sorry, hold on just a second. I'd love to share my interest with my current team in making plans to leave my firm, and they would be my best references, but how can we do that without damaging our current positions?
Yeah, I'd be very careful about that. Once you, I'll probably have a chapter called Dead Man Walking in my book, because once you notify people you want to leave, it is sort of like dead man walking, even when you retire. And I had to give, as an executive officer, I had to give a long notice for retirement. I gave almost a year's notice for retirement. And once that begins to get out, then people are like, oh, she's gone, let's just focus on something else. So I would not suggest that you tell people until you are obligated to tell them based upon your position in the company. It just typically does not go well with that. And I know a lot of times we have friends at the company as well, but if it really doesn't involve them, if they're not part of that, then they should probably get the notice right at the time that you're, telling your leader. But some things are best left unsaid, but especially if you're thinking about transition to another company, just wait until the time happens. And the other thing I would tell you is, what's really important about that is I've actually had people that have announced it, told everybody, but didn't take their drug test. And then they failed the drug test and they didn't get the other job. And then they were out of a job because they had resigned from their first job well in advance. So just keep it to yourself until all is said and done, including passing that drug test.
All right, we have a lot of thanks for your time and also all of your answers. So people are appreciating your time today, as we as well. But we have another question, and it's about recruitment companies. And it says, to what extent are they helpful in finding a job that you want to have?
I think the recruiters are very, very helpful. As I mentioned earlier, the higher up you are in an organization, the narrower the roles that are available, and the broader the amount of people that are available. But staying in front of recruiters for all the firms are just really, really important. You get to update your resume pretty frequently. Many of the recruiting firms also do boards. So for me, I knew when I wanted to go into boards, I called the recruiters because I knew they had areas that they did board seats. So I would just say staying on top of them is really important. And it's important because you get in their database and you stay updated in their database. So one of the board seats I got was through a recruiter, but a recruiter I hadn't met, but I had interacted with so many other people in his firm that my resume was there, it was up to date. And he said, we were just in this meeting and I was pitching, and somebody said, you know what? I talked to Beth Bierbower recently. She might be good for that. So it was just serendipitous. But if you can stay top of mind, that's what's really, really critical. So I think, I've talked to the recruiters for forever. I have never been interested in jobs because I've always enjoyed the job that I was in, and I've never actually gotten a job through another recruiter, but I returned their phone calls because I actually figured someday I'd probably be booted out and I'd need them. That didn't ever happen, but they've helped me from a board perspective. So they're good people. If you can refer people to them and they find you helpful, they'll stay in touch with you. And it's just a great network to have with the recruiters.
All right, our next question says, when you're looking to make the move from middle management to a director type position, are recruiters helpful at that level? Or are you on your own at that point? Or is there some other avenue?
No, I think you can use recruiters certainly. And I would say I've never paid a recruiter, so I would simply say don't go down that path. You don't need to pay a recruiter. You need to use the recruiters that the companies are paying. Those are the ones that have the high paying jobs that, from middle management up, that you're looking at. So let me frame that, number one. I think that one of the things is from JobBite, the company JobBite said, or no, LinkedIn said 85% of jobs come from referrals. So it usually is that somebody is teeing your name up. So that idea of networking and just broadening your network and meeting people, whether it's socially or professionally or whatever, that is what's really, really important. And then I would say the other thing is, when we do get back to more physical locations, being, I know working remotely is enjoyable for the most part. I've actually, the 19 years I worked for Humana, I commuted. I never actually lived in Louisville, Kentucky, but I was there 4.5 days a week. And then I would come home on the weekends if I wasn't traveling to another city, because having that exposure to people, those casual collisions, are really important. One day I was literally sitting in my office and I looked up and I saw a gentleman, and I had an opening for a vice president. I saw a gentleman and I said, "Oh my God, why didn't I think of him for this role?" And literally I said, wait, I have this job opening. Do you think you're interested? And I mean, just because he was walking past my office, because, we had 45,000 employees, right? So that exposure, and I know now it's a little bit harder because you're on Zoom, but every time I tell people, you're on an interview every day. Every day you're on an interview. And now, even though you're on Zoom, you're still on an interview. So how you present yourself, how you're engaging, how you're interacting. So just try to make sure you can get as much exposure as you can. Participating on cross-functional projects and committees and different things like that are really, really important. So I think you can do it. Just make sure you continue to have that exposure and be engaged, and people will see that. They see the people that are heads down on their phone or typing during the meetings, and they see the people that are engaged. Be engaged. As a friend of mine said, don't be a tourist, be engaged.
All right, the next question says, when assessing my own skills, collecting and connecting people really resonates, but it seems to be undervalued by more technical companies, at least on a resume. In your own experience, how would you recommend speaking to these types of skills when trying to transition to more technical companies/roles?
Sure. So I would say that certainly if you're in a technical company, there are roles like business development, for example, where connecting people is really, really important. So for example, if you're in the healthcare industry and you want to get into health plans, the more relationships you have with people in health plans, the better that you are. But also, if you are in a technical role, developing relationships with other technicians is really important. It's really important because, as you know, in the tech companies today, it's really hard to attract good talent. I know that if you're trying to hire an engineer, like, and you're in Boston or New York or San Francisco, by the time you interview them, they already have 2 or 3 job offers on the table, right, from some of the other big companies. So even though you have a technical background, developing those relationships, number one, helps you to recruit good talent to the table. But number two, also exposes you to really smart people that are trying to work on big problems, and just helps, I think, you personally grow as an individual, because you'll be bringing new ideas to the table first. I had something called a reverse mentor when I was at Humana from time to time, particularly out of IT, because anybody would tell you that was not my strength. And so I had a young man who came and explained to me what blockchain is. Took him about 4 times. He would probably still tell you, I really don't understand it very well, but I had that reverse mentoring. And so what I would say is, even if you're in a tech company and you have a tech background, there are ways for you to connect with others, like people like me who aren't tech, that would love for somebody like you to sit down and explain, okay, what is this cloud thing? What is this, what is TikTok? What is Clubhouse? What are some of these things that are going on here? Very, very helpful. So relationships matter, even if you have a strong technical bent, probably even more so.
All right. The next question says, how do you deal with gaps in your resume?
Yeah, gaps in your resume aren't as, we used to look at gaps at your in resume and say, what happened? What happened? Why, did they get fired and they were just out? Just be transparent. People understand if you say, listen, I took time off to care for my aging parent, right? I took 6 months off. They were in hospice or whatever. I think be transparent. I think you sit there and say, I took a year off because I had a non-compete. I wanted to stay, in Seattle, and I couldn't go to a competitor, so I had to honor my year non-compete. So just be as transparent as possible. Just don't lie. Just don't not tell the truth, because the minute you do that, somebody will know, somebody will find out, and then it could cost you not only your job, but then your reputation. So you just be very honest. If you've been let go, you sit there and say, look, I've been let go. I was part of a downsizing. And people understand that. Good people get caught up in downsizing. So be transparent and just be honest. It's always the cover up that is worse than the actual truth.
Beth, we're coming to the end. We still have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask a question, and I'm going to just come off camera and ask as opposed to putting it in the chat. But I would sense that there's an emotional void maybe, or a transition that you have to make when you go into a new career, or even if you retire. Maybe you had a lot of responsibility and now all of a sudden, what do? Have you had any experience in advising people on that?
Yeah, thank you. I have, because emotion is a really big part of it. And one of the things that I did is I started and I journaled my my transition for when I actually was giving my notice on through the actual transition out. And I was going back reading those journals, Ron, I share with you, and there's a lot of feeling and emotion in there, right? And what you'll find is, one day you're leading a big team and you have all these people reporting to you and people reporting to them. And then like the next day, it's like, well, it's just me. I don't even have an administrative assistant. And how do I get this on my calendar, right? So there is a lot of emotion, and you should be prepared for that, and you should make sure that you have good support system in place. I found things like journaling really helps, because you can kind of get your feelings out, and then you kind of look at it and you say, yeah, you know what, that is the way I felt. Now I can move on. I feel better. Also, having a support system in terms of colleagues. I had a friend that left very abruptly her job in an emotional event. And she decided to go see a therapist afterwards. It was about 60 days afterwards. She goes, I've got to see a therapist, because she said, one day I was in charge of all these people and now it's just me, right? So I would say just make sure you have the right support. And also I'd say try not to make something in an emotional decision, because that really works out really, really well. But really make sure you're having the right discussions with your loved ones and your family and the friends, people are close to you, because there will be that emotional thing about how you are going to handle the emotion. I mean, my husband and I talked a lot about it, because with his HR background, he was really able to help me. And I said, this is going to be really weird. Like, I'm used to doing these big town halls and this, that, and the other thing. And now that will all be gone. And I felt like these people were my family. And so just make sure you really have that support system in place, and try not to make a decision based upon emotion. Try to make it really, really rational, or as rational as you can.
Well, that was going to be the final question, but I do see a question from my friend Dennis Wang in the chat. So I'm going to make this the final question. And Dennis is asking about corporations rescinding offers due to COVID and other business factors. Is there any advice there about getting back into the workforce, possibly, if that's the reason that you had to leave?
Yeah, what I would just tell you is that obviously everybody's facing a tough time right now. Individuals, corporations are trying to, figure out how to make sure that they can many of them stay in business and do things like that. And I would not lose hope. And I would say, especially if somebody had made an offer and came back to you and said, listen, we have to rescind because we had to change our business strategy. You have that connection there. Take advantage of that connection, stay in touch with them. I would say don't blame the messenger, because there was a bigger strategy at work here, and something even bigger than all of us with the pandemic. So I would leverage that opportunity to continue to if that's the company you want to get to continue to leverage working with that organization. Now, if you've already left another organization, just keep that networking going. as much as you can. Any connection you can make for any reason is good, because you never know where that connection will lead you to. Even a week down the road or 10 years down the road, a connection can always help you in some way or form.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat box. We do have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, which is 3 minutes away, because Beth does have to get to another one of her commitments that she has transitioned to. I do want to thank you, Beth. This was very insightful. As I mentioned at the beginning, this has been recorded. We will follow up with the recording. Beth has also agreed to let us share her contact information. So if you have questions directly for her, that will be included. And we want to make sure that you're able to get into her podcast. So we'll include information about that as well. Before we sign off, I do want to say, in my other hat, I am Director of Career Services. It is the spring semester. Students are looking for internships. So as alums, if your organizations are hiring for internships, please send those my way. Be happy to share those with our students, and full-time positions as well. My contact information will also be included in the follow-up email. And just once again, thanks a lot, Beth. Appreciate you being here. This was fantastic. And
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.